This summer, 3 detainees in Guantanamo Bay committed suicide. To human rights campaigners, it was even more evidence of the despair of those held without charge and without any hope of release. But to the Bush administration, it was an act of asymmetric warfare, a continuation in prison of the war by al-Qaeda terrorists bent on martyrdom and attempting to discredit the United States. Peter Marshall has been investigating the psychological war being waged inside the camp at Guantanamo Bay, including the startling claim that a British-born lawyer was somehow behind the suicides.
June the 11th, and the mood inside Guantanamo Bay for both jailers and prisoners is shock. Overnight, 3 detainees have hanged themselves. Some in the US military are claiming they know who plotted it all. They say a British resident, this man, called for the deaths from his cell. And it suggested a renowned British human rights lawyer, this man, was behind it. The theory's simple.
That he put them up to actually people taking their own lives. That it was Clive's idea, Clive's brainchild, that people had to commit suicide to bring attention to the base and to then force the government to close it.
However much they reveal the despair of the victims, the suicides must have been planned and coordinated. The Americans say it's al-Qaeda.
It's resistance, it's organization, it's all of those things to put pressures on the guards and to create an international uproar which will compel the United States to release these individuals. That's what this is about.
Shaka Rama is now in his 2nd year in an isolation cell in Guantanamo Bay. He was born in Saudi Arabia, but has a British wife and family and a home in London. 5 years ago, they'd all gone to Afghanistan, he says, to build a school and dig wells. And then the world changed.
I remember on the night of September the 11th, there was a banging on the door late at night in my house in Kabul. I went to open the door and found Shaka there, sort of very excited. And he said, "Haven't you heard the news?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "America's been attacked."
By the end of 2001, Shaka Rama was a prisoner of the Americans in Afghanistan.
First thing I heard of him in custody was about Kandahar, how he'd been held there, and how one of the guards told me that he was, and he used this term, I was that close to accepting his proselytization for Islam, and that in the end he decided not to, but he was really taken by Shaka's character, by his way with words, by his gift of the gab, as it were.
So a prisoner who all but persuades his captors to convert to Islam. Shaka Rama is a man who provokes starkly opposing views, but both his defenders and his jailers are agreed on one thing. He is a charismatic figure, a natural leader. And it's this, according to his lawyer, which has marked him apart in Guantanamo Bay.
The military clearly thinks he's dangerous, not just in the sense that they think he is a leader in Guantanamo Bay, but they've got it into their minds that because he's so outspoken, he's some big figure in al-Qaeda, which is something that's just not true.
What is true is that the Americans, almost from the start, were apprehensive about prisoners organising themselves. We found a secret CIA report from August 2002 entitled
Terrorist Recruiting and Operating Behind Bars.
It warns,
reporting from Guantanamo Bay Naval Base suggests al-Qaeda members there are trying to put their training into practice by establishing cell block leaders.
Just like U.S. soldiers are given training, we're given what they call SERE training, survival and resistance training. Al-Qaeda did the same thing with their people, and they are instituting these practices at Guantanamo.
Gary Berntsen is one of the CIA's most decorated officers. He led clandestine operations in Afghanistan and says he understands the psychological war going on now inside Guantanamo Bay.
Well, clearly, the prisoners in Guantanamo have organized themselves and are collectively attempting to resist and are clearly, trying to put pressure on those that are holding them to define the terms of their incarceration. And, this is not something that should be happening. We have to determine the terms of their incarceration.
When detainees at Guantanamo began a hunger strike, Shaka Rama was put into isolation. When his lawyer visited, he too was accused.
Well, the first thing, and this was months and months ago, was they took me into a cell and one of the military officers threatened me and told me that they thought I was behind the hunger strikes. and threatened to put me in that cell. And I was really incensed by that.
They said you were behind the hunger strike.
They did, and they said that it was me and Shaka who had been plotting it, and that was false. And I wrote them a letter saying, I don't want to hear anything more about this or I'll be suing you people.
With the hunger strike showing no sign of breaking, the US command adopted a different tack. They placed one of Guantanamo's youngest detainees in the next cell to Shaka Arma. His name is Mohammed Al-Gharani.
Mohammed Al-Gharani and Shaka are quite close. Sort of a father-son relationship almost. Shaka is about 40 years old. Mohammed, only 15 when he arrives, is desperately in need of some type of support. It's an incredibly brutal environment. And so Shaka basically took him under his wing and treats him essentially as a son, looks out for him. Shaka was on hunger strike at the time. And so they thought that if they brought Mohammed in, he could convince Shaka to give up the hunger strike.
So what happened?
Mohammed is brought in temporarily, just for a day or two, to speak with Shaka. He actually does convince Shaka to stop the hunger strike. But supposedly, according to the interrogators, during this time, Shaka passes a message to Mohammed to deliver back to the main cell block. It's delivered to other prisoners. And the message, supposedly, is from Clive Stafford Smith. And the message is that somebody needs to die for Guantanamo to close. Clive never, ever would say such a thing.
The would-be messenger, Mohammed Al-Gharani, says he was threatened with being put in isolation himself unless he'd implicate Clive Stafford Smith.
Well, unfortunately, I think they're targeting me over these suicides in Guantanamo because the military doesn't want to accept that the prisoners got depressed because they've been treated so badly. So they want to point the finger of blame wherever they can. And in terms of the evidence, they've been interrogating one of my clients, a young kid, still only 19, trying to get him to say that I was telling people to commit suicide, which is flagrantly false. But it's dangerous because you put enough pressure on somebody, they're likely to say anything.
Is it not possible you'd have said to Shaka Arma, look, they're not going to stop this until somebody dies, without meaning to encourage it?
Of course I didn't, no. And in fact, I've spent all of my time trying to stop people committing suicide. I can't tell you the number of my clients who have got really depressed and who have talked to me about wanting to take their own lives. And the last thing I want is for my clients to come out of Guantanamo in a wooden coffin. I want them to come out alive.
The Pentagon won't comment on what's an extraordinary allegation, but one senior officer who was in Guantanamo at the time confirmed to Newsnight that he personally had suspicions about Clive Stafford Smith, although he had absolutely no evidence whatsoever. He also said he'd wished he'd had a better understanding of Arab culture. He then cited the case of the young detainee Mohammed Al-Gharani, saying how he used to charge from one end of his cell to the other, headlong into the wall, repeatedly.
It is very difficult to maintain a compliant prison population when their detention is going to be indefinite. And I think this is why the United States has built new facilities there, built facilities that would be structured in a way that could allow that and allow them to be held safely. We don't want them to be a danger to themselves or to the prison guards that are holding them. Look, no one in the United States wants to be holding these people. We don't have much of a choice, unfortunately.
Newsnight can reveal an affidavit signed by a female sergeant in the Marine Corps only last week indicates detainees are being abused by the military inside Guantanamo as common practice. She says one guard
told the other guards and me about him beating different detainees. He slammed the detainee's head into the cell door.
She says another spoke of provoking detainees
so that they can punish them when they object or complain. About 5 others in the group admitted hitting detainees, to include punching in the face. Everyone in the group laughed at the other stories of beating detainees.
As for Shaka Arma, his much vaunted charisma remains contained within an isolation cell.
Right now, I think the American military think that Shaka Arma is the leader of Al-Qaeda in Guantanamo Bay because he speaks English, because he's so well educated, because he's obviously a leader of people, therefore he must be a leader of Al-Qaeda.
But he does command respect among Al-Qaeda people in the prison as well.
Shaka commands a lot of respect among the prisoners in Guantanamo. I think, setting modesty aside, that I command some respect among the prisoners in Guantanamo because I've been so involved in the cases, no other reason. that doesn't mean that I'm a leader of Al-Qaeda.
Whatever Shaka Arma's true status, and after 5 years neither charge nor evidence has been produced, he's still effectively outside the law. Like the other Guantanamo detainees, he's not beyond punishment, but he is, as yet, beyond justice.